Aviation has always been about pushing limits. The Wright brothers gave us the first powered flight, and within a lifetime, we were crossing oceans and breaking sound barriers. But not every bold idea made it. For every successful design that transformed air travel or warfare, there were radical machines that promised the future, but never reached it. Politics crushed some. Some were victims of cost, timing, or sheer ambition, and some were simply too dangerous to survive. Yet they all carry stories of genius, courage, and imagination. Today, we explore 11 revolutionary planes that never truly took off. These are the lost giants, the forgotten fighters, and the doomed dream machines that shaped aviation, even in failure. The Convair Model 49. Vietnam was turning into a nightmare for military planners. Fast jets screamed overhead too quickly to help soldiers pinned in firefights, while slow helicopters made perfect targets for anyone with a rifle. The Pentagon needed something that could hover like a chopper, but fight like a jet fighter. Convair's engineers convinced themselves they could build a machine that transformed from one form to another. Picture this. You're a test pilot in 1965, and your commanding officer just told you to strap into an aircraft that transforms mid-flight. Not metaphorically, literally. You'll take off pointing straight up like a rocket, then experience the surreal sensation of your entire cockpit slowly rotating forward until you're flying like a normal jet. That was the Model 49, a machine that looked like someone had asked a 12-year-old to design the ultimate transformer and then challenged Convair's engineers to actually build it. Building a transforming aircraft in the 1960s wasn't easy. It was like trying to make a smartphone with vacuum tubes. The mechanical complexity was staggering, and more, the control systems were constantly confused about flying a helicopter or an aeroplane. Unsurprisingly, the more conventional Lockheed AH-56A Cheyenne won the competition, though even that got cancelled when the Army decided the AH-64 Apache was a safer bet. The Model 49 disappeared into aviation history, leaving behind only concept drawings and the lingering question of what might have happened if someone had figured out how to make a transformer jet work. The Sukhoi T-4.
When America unveiled the SR-71 Blackbird, it shocked the world. Mach 3 speed, titanium skin, and a look like it came from the future. The Soviet Union couldn't let that stand. Their answer was the Sukhoi T-4, a massive dagger-like jet designed for reconnaissance and bombing. It was primarily built from titanium, an exotic metal that most countries could barely afford to experiment with. Working with titanium in the 1960s was like trying to cook gourmet meals with a campfire. Soviet metallurgists had to reinvent manufacturing under intense political pressure to match America's SR-71. One mistake wouldn't just cost money. In the Soviet system, engineering failures could cost careers, freedom, or worse. The engineers filed 600 patents just figuring out how to bend, weld, and shape this space-age metal into something resembling an airplane. August 22, 1972. Vladimir Ilyushin climbed into the cockpit of what looked like a titanium dart designed by aliens. His father had created some of the Soviet Union's most successful aircraft, but nothing had prepared the family name for this moment. And then it flew, magnificently. For a few precious moments, the Soviet Union matched America's impossible Blackbird with their Mach 3 masterpiece. Then reality delivered the invoice. Defense Minister Andrei Grechko looked at the costs and told the engineers, "This beautiful titanium sculpture costs more than a small city's annual budget, and we need practical MiG fighters, not flying art projects." 10 flights, 10 hours and 20 minutes in the air. That's all the T-4 got, before becoming perhaps the most expensive museum piece in aviation history. The Northrop XP-79. The XP-79 was unlike anything before it. Instead of guns, it was designed to use its body as a weapon. This flying wing was built to slice into enemy bombers and tear them apart, while somehow keeping the American pilot alive. Here's where things get wild. Instead of shooting down enemy bombers, the XP-79 was supposed to ram them out of the sky and keep flying. The pilot would lie flat on his belly, and reinforced magnesium wings would slice through enemy aircraft like a flying guillotine. September 12, 1945. Test pilot Harry Crosby strapped himself into a flying wing
designed to survive mid-air collisions. Think about that for a moment. His job description included crash into enemy aircraft and live to tell about it. 15 minutes into his first flight, Crosby spun uncontrollably, plummeting toward the California desert. He tried to bail out, the one thing you don't want to do when flying a plane designed to slice through other aircraft. The XP-79 caught him, and both man and machine died together, ending one of aviation's most questionable experiments. The whole ramming concept reads like something from a fever dream. Even with magnesium armor and pilots lying flat to survive impacts, you're still talking about aerial jousting at 500 miles per hour. It's the kind of idea that makes perfect sense at 2 a.m. during a desperate brainstorming session and sounds completely insane when you have to do it.
The Hughes H-4 Hercules. November 2nd, 1947. Long Beach Harbor. Howard Hughes was about to risk everything on 26 seconds of flight that nobody asked for. The H-4 was supposed to just taxi across the water for reporters who'd been calling his wooden whale a waste of money for years. Hughes had different plans. Imagine the scene, a crowd of skeptics watching from boats, cameras rolling, and Hughes sitting in the cockpit of an aircraft the size of a city block, built entirely from wood, while the rest of the world was moving to metal. Instead, Hughes pulled back on the controls and lifted all 400,000 pounds of his wooden dream into the air. For 26 seconds, barely long enough to prove a point, the largest aircraft ever built at that time skimmed 70 feet above the harbour. It was simultaneously a vindication and a funeral. Hughes had proven his critics wrong and said goodbye to his obsession at the same time. The H-4 was designed to carry 750 troops across the Atlantic during World War II, when German U-boats turned shipping lanes into graveyards. By the time it flew, the war was over and the mission obsolete. Today, walking through the H-4 is like exploring a cathedral built by someone who thought he could make clouds jealous. You can spend an hour just wandering through its cavernous interior, marveling that someone convinced a government to fund the construction of a wooden aircraft carrier that could fly.
The Tupolev Tu-144.
The Soviets beat Concorde into the air by 4 months, and for a hot minute in 1968, it looked like the communist aviation program had pulled off the upset of the century. Then, people tried to ride in the thing. The engines were so ear-splittingly loud that having a conversation required shouting. Flight attendants gave up trying to talk altogether, instead scribbling notes and passing them around the cabin like they were in detention. Imagine boarding a Tu-144 for what was supposed to be a luxury flight and discovering that everyday conversation was impossible over the engine noise. It was less supersonic luxury and more flying inside a jet engine.
June 3rd, 1973, Paris Air Show.
This was supposed to be the Soviet Union's moment of triumph. The Tu-144 would demonstrate supersonic passenger flight to the world's aviation elite. Instead, thousands of spectators watched in horror as the aircraft disintegrated in mid-air like a giant metal firework. The crew died instantly. 8 people on the ground died when burning debris rained down on a French village. In less than a minute, the Soviet supersonic dream became a supersonic nightmare broadcast to the world. Concorde went on to carry passengers safely for 27 years, becoming a symbol of technological elegance. The Tu-144 managed 55 passenger flights before the Soviets quietly admitted defeat. Sometimes being first means you get to be the first to fail spectacularly.
The Bartini Beriev VVA-14.
Meet Robert Bartini, an Italian engineer working in Stalin's Soviet Union who looked at the problem of hunting American nuclear submarines and thought, you know what this needs? A flying machine that looks like it escaped from a 1960s sci-fi movie. The VVA-14 was his answer. Part seaplane, part hovercraft, part fever dream. Picture 12 tiny jet engines scattered around an aircraft that seemed designed by a committee between aliens and marine biologists. The plan was beautifully insane.
This thing would blast straight up from the ocean like some kind of mechanical whale, then skim along the wave tops, hunting submarines. Soviet admirals fell in love with the concept on paper. An aircraft that could take off from any patch of ocean bigger than a bathtub, that could outrun enemy destroyers while carrying enough firepower to sink them. There was one tiny problem. The specialized engines that were supposed to make the vertical takeoff magic happen never arrived. It's like ordering a transformer robot and receiving a complicated car that can't transform. One prototype got built, flew around just enough to prove that Bartini wasn't completely crazy, and then retired to slowly rust in a Soviet aircraft graveyard. Today, somewhere in Russia, the VVA-14 sits like a movie prop, waiting for a film that will never be made. A reminder that the coolest-looking aircraft are often cool precisely because they're too wonderfully weird to actually work.
The Martin P6M SeaMaster. The US Navy looked at its precious aircraft carriers, basically floating cities stuffed with jet fuel and explosives, and had a terrifying realization. One well-placed enemy bomb could turn a $2 billion carrier into the world's most expensive artificial reef. Their solution? Build nuclear bombers that could take off from the ocean itself. The SeaMaster was their attempt at turning the entire Pacific into an unsinkable runway. This sleek, jet-flying boat could land anywhere there was enough water, get refueled by a submarine, and deliver nuclear weapons to targets that land-based bombers couldn't reach. For a brief moment, the Navy dreamed of having bomber fleets that were impossible to destroy, because they never stayed in one place. The SeaMaster worked pretty well in testing. It could haul nuclear weapons at near supersonic speeds and land on any body of water bigger than a lake. For about 5 minutes, the Navy's dream of unsinkable bomber fleets seemed achievable. Then ICBMs came along and ruined everything. Why send expensive crews flying around the ocean for hours when you could deliver the same nuclear destruction in 30 minutes with an uncrewed rocket? The SeaMaster program died the same death as coldest war aircraft, killed by a better way to end the world.
The Bristol Brabazon. Post-war Britain had a case of aviation megalomania that would make Howard Hughes blush. Fresh from defeating Nazi Germany, British engineers decided to show the world who owned the skies. The Brabazon wasn't just an airplane. It was a flying 5-star hotel with delusions of grandeur. Individual sleeping berths for every passenger, cocktail lounges with actual bartenders, a cinema showing the latest films. This wasn't transportation, it was a country club with wings that happened to fly at 300 miles per hour. The engineering team attacked the project with typical British determination to do things the hard way. They demolished an entire village to extend their runway. Imagine explaining to the displaced residents that their homes had to go because Britain needed to build a flying palace. Here's where reality crashed the party. Airline executives took one look at this magnificent flying hotel and politely asked, "But can it make money?" The answer was a resounding no. The Brabazon could pamper 100 passengers in unprecedented luxury, while American competitors could stuff 80 passengers into practical seats for half the operating cost. Only one Brabazon was built, and it never carried a paying passenger. The British government eventually scrapped its flying palace and recycled the materials for more practical purposes.
The Convair F2Y Sea Dart. The US Navy looked at the Korean War and learned a harsh lesson. Runways are giant bullseyes painted on the ground, begging enemy bombers to visit. Their solution was to embrace the absurd. Build a supersonic fighter that could take off from the one runway nobody could bomb, the ocean itself. The Sea Dart was peak 1950s optimism, wrapped in titanium and strapped to rocket engines. Picture a sleek delta-wing fighter sitting on retractable water skis like a supersonic jet ski.
Against every law of common sense and several laws of physics, the concept worked. On July 31st, 1954, the Sea Dart became the first and only seaplane to break the sound barrier. But water operations were about as smooth as you'd expect from strapping jets to water skis. Takeoffs resembled controlled explosions more than graceful departures, with the aircraft bouncing across the waves like an angry metal dolphin. August 4th, 1954, the dream died in the most public way possible. During a demonstration flight with reporters and Navy brass watching from boats, a Sea Dart simply came apart in midair. Test pilot Charles Richburg died instantly as his revolutionary fighter disintegrated above San Diego Bay, raining titanium debris into the water where it had once skimmed so gracefully. The Sea Dart proved that with enough engineering stubbornness, you could make almost anything fly, even a jet fighter on water skis. But it also proved that just because you can do something doesn't mean you should.
The Lockheed YF-12. While the SR-71 Blackbird was becoming a legend, sneaking around enemy airspace, taking photographs, its forgotten older brother was designed to blow Soviet bombers out of the sky at 3 times the speed of sound. The YF-12 looked nearly identical to its famous sibling. Same sleek titanium body, same alien-looking design that seemed borrowed from the future. But this one carried missiles instead of cameras. Imagine being a Soviet bomber pilot in the 1960s and learning that the Americans had built an interceptor that could climb to 80,000 feet and chase you down at Mach 3. Lockheed built 3 of these Mach 3 interceptors, and they worked magnificently. Test pilots who flew the YF-12 described it as the closest thing to a spaceship that still needed air to breathe. Then the real world intruded with its usual sense of timing. The Vietnam War was devouring defense budgets faster than the YF-12 could burn fuel, and expensive supersonic interceptors suddenly seemed less important than helicopters and ground attack aircraft. The YF-12 got axed in favor of cheaper ground-based missiles and more practical Vietnam-era aircraft. The technology lived on in the SR-71 reconnaissance version, but the fighter variant became aviation's greatest what if. Today, the YF-12 remains the Blackbird's forgotten older brother, forever stuck in the shadow of its more famous spy plane sibling. The Republic XF-103. Republic Aviation's engineers looked at the problem of intercepting Soviet bombers and decided to build a manned missile. The XF-103 was their attempt to create something that belonged more in a Buck Rogers comic strip than on any earthly runway. A fighter that would combine jet and rocket engines to achieve speeds that seemed borrowed from science fiction. Picture this scenario. Soviet bombers appear on early warning radar, heading for American cities. Within minutes, XF-103s would blast off like guided missiles, with human pilots climbing to impossible altitudes faster than most aircraft could taxi. The cockpit design read like something from a space program. Pilots would be sealed inside heavily armored capsules, protected from the searing heat of Mach 3 flight and the near-vacuum conditions of the upper atmosphere. The Republic's plan was beautifully straightforward. When World War III started, these rocket fighters would defend American airspace with a combination of speed, altitude, and firepower that no enemy could match. One problem with this magnificent vision was that by the time the Republic finished designing its rocket interceptor, intercontinental ballistic missiles had made the whole concept as obsolete as cavalry charges. Why risk highly trained pilots in experimental aircraft when you could shoot down incoming bombers with ground-based missiles that didn't need life support systems or landing strips? The XF-103 never progressed beyond detailed blueprints. However, those designs remain some of the most ambitious fighter concepts ever put to paper.
These 11 planes are more than failures. They are monuments to ambition, risk, and imagination. Each was built with courage and vision and aimed to change the world. Some were victims of timing, overtaken by missiles and new technology. Others fell to politics, cost, or tragedy. But together, they remind us that progress comes from daring. Even the machines that never flew shaped the future of aviation. If you enjoyed uncovering these lost legends of flight, hit that subscribe button to join our aviation community and give this video a thumbs up if these incredible stories of ambition and engineering amazed you.